So here we are. We're going to talk about the 2019 vintage that we are releasing this month. We had good water in 2019. It was a very good rain year. We had quite a bit of rain in January, even more so in February, some in March, and it went all the way into May, which is pretty rare up here. And it was a relatively cool beginning of the season. May especially was pretty cold for what we usually have here. And then bud break was the third week of April, which is also on the later side, but it reflects the colder vintage. All this to say that delayed the ripening quite a bit, and the picking date was quite late this year. Overall, we look at what's called growing degree days, which is the accumulation of temperature above 50 degrees once the plants start growing until harvest. It's a useful tool to compare different areas, and every appellation in Napa has its own growing degree days. Although it will change if you're up on the mountain, if you're 100 feet high or lower than where I am, it's going to change. But anyways, it's a broad measure. And so in 2018, as well as 2019, this vintage, the growing degree days were the lowest in Napa, even lower than Carneros. So this is, at least where I'm at, we're on the cooler side of Napa Valley. So 2019, apart for the cooler start, was pretty uneventful until the end, when we were harvesting, especially towards the end. This was my latest picking in my career, but I accelerated it at the end because all of a sudden one morning I woke up with smoke all over the place. It was a little too close to the 17, and I freaked out and pulled the trigger and picked the next day or 2 days after the smoke. So the smoke came from a huge fire in Sonoma called the Kincaid Fire that destroyed a bunch of vineyards and places in the southern end of, well, not southern end of Sonoma, in the mountains above Alexander Valley. And so the smoke was blown here for a few hours. Luckily, it didn't stay much, and so we don't have any smoke taint on the wines. But it sure as hell woke up some memories. Anyways, so here we're going to try the end results of all this work. We're going to try the Pawa, the Witha, and Kitoko vineyards. So we're going to start with the Pawa. Pawa this year is 58% from Didier Vineyards, and the rest is from up here on Kitoko Vineyard. And as usual, it's the middle part of harvest where we have a little more fruit-forward character, crunchy fruits, and then I blend it with Didier Vineyards. The mouthfeel is nice, soft, plush, rich. You have a cola character as flavors with some leafiness that will become fresh tobacco leaf with time. There's a slight chalkiness to the wine, indicating the quality of the tannins. It's usually something that I like in wine. It's a good character to have. And the finish is very long, very fresh and savory. So now we are on to Witha. Witha is usually the blend of Kitoko vineyards, the early pick, and the vineyard in Koensville called Upstream. There were issues, sanitary issues in the cellar this vintage, and so this year Witha is just the early pick of Kitoko vineyards. And it's specifically from 3 vineyards. The vineyard at the entrance with the steep slopes, that's the biggest portion, almost half. Then there's another block that's really good, that's right next to the ponds with the short rows. And the rest is from the upper block. And as usual, I shoot for more early flavors, a little more earthiness, plant character in Witha. It makes the wine a little more complex when it's young, a little more difficult perhaps to understand, but this vintage the ripeness helps. and I want a wine that's a little more brisk, and so that's what I base my selections on. There are a lot of floral notes that typically also come with earlier harvest. There's a tea leaf character indicative of the early harvest, the plant character I'm looking for. But there's a lot of fresh fruit, like fresh raspberry, along with some poached fruits. There's some cranberry, some sweet tobacco, some lead pencil. Hints of cocoa and caramel that comes from the barrel. The wine is very smooth, very fine grains, and has a nice acidity, although it's not very acidic, but it gives you that impression of acidity. It's a very light-footed wine. That will become really, really nice with time. So now we're on to Kitoko vineyards. Kitoko is always 100% the fruit from the vineyard up here on Atlas Peak. And it is the selection of the better lots. That's the blend I start with, so it gets all the good stuff. And it shows. It's a very classical Cabernet nose of that cassis bud character. Then you get some poached fruit, some cassis, some Bing cherry, very slight herbal note, as I noted with the cassis leaf. It's smooth, it's rich, it's the densest of the wines. Very fine quality, very fine grains. There's no angularity at all in this wine. It's very long and has that nice chalkiness that's pure elegance with time. And so I hope you really enjoy these wines the way I do, the way I enjoyed making them, and I enjoy drinking them too. So santé!